Tony Blair has defended his government's decision to push for the release of the British man Ronald Fiddler from Guantanamo Bay back in 2004. The former Prime Minister says the Conservative government then went on to pay him compensation, reportedly up to £1 million, for the abuse he suffered while in detention. IS claims that it was behind a suicide attack in Iraq on Monday. The former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw says there's no evidence to suggest that he had been radicalised or was a terrorist.
Our services, which are amongst the best in the world, and they've been greatly expanded by both governments, are not magicians. They're not clairvoyant. People are free to leave this country. In certain circumstances, they can be stopped, but there has to be some kind of evidence against them. So the only person responsible for the fact that this man was a terrible terrorist committing outrages, let us be clear about this, was Ronnie Fiddler, nobody else.
Well, Tony Blair also said his government would be criticised whatever course of action it took. So is the UK doing enough to vet suspected terrorists? Joining us to discuss this is Tom Wilson, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Waiting to also hear from Dr Afzal Ashraf, Consultant Fellow at RUSI. He will be joining us very shortly. Got stuck in the London traffic. He'll join the conversation when he gets here. But let's start without him, should we? Henry, if he's not here, we'll start without him. So, can terrorists ever be de-radicalised?
There certainly are instances in which people could be de-radicalised, but the problem is at the moment we don't have a system that we know for certain works. And if you look at what's happening in Europe at the moment, you've got different European countries trying different models. The French model is quite draconian, some would say, the Danish model more relaxed. I think the British one is pretty good, but it's certainly not watertight, and we're taking a huge gamble with British people's lives.
OK, so there is a system in place here in the United Kingdom, though, isn't there, where we do try to either stop people going even before they become radicalised in whatever manner, and also stopping people as they're coming back into the country. I'm thinking about teenagers in particular. You don't feel that that is in any way effective? Well,
there certainly are things in place so that when people return, they can then be engaged with. But I think we need to be looking at...
Mostly teenagers, it has to be said, I suppose.
Sure, but I think ideally it would be better if those people weren't coming back to the UK at all. There are things such as temporary exclusion orders, which we could see being more extensively used. Of course, when they were proposed...
What would you like to see done to them? Where would you like them to go?
Well, in some cases they would stay in a country such as Turkey for a period until it could be determined exactly what they had been involved with. I think we have to remember when people have been part of terrorist organisations, which is illegal, really they ought to be put on trial, they ought to be prosecuted, they ought to go to prison. Of course, it's very difficult to get evidence when people have been committing crimes in war zones.
But you don't feel that under any circumstances there could perhaps be an amnesty for people who have been potentially radicalised here in the United Kingdom or who are trying to come back, along with tight monitoring by the security services?
I think that, de-radicalisation can take place in prisons as well. I think an amnesty would be morally wrong where you've got people who've been involved in, say, crimes against humanity. And I think most people know instinctively that that is wrong, but also it creates a security threat for the public. We have to remember that the threat from foreign fighters is significant. Look at what happened in Brussels and Paris. The majority of those fighters were, foreign-trained, foreign-experienced fighters from Syria. So there's a big risk here as well. And we don't know that the surveillance can be absolute.
OK. Dr Afzal Ashraf has managed to join us now, Consultant Fellow at RUSI. Hello to you. Thank you for joining the conversation. We appreciate you taking the time. We've just been hearing from Tom, who feels that probably in most cases, I think it's right to paraphrase what Tom has been saying, that in fact people cannot be de-radicalised once they have gone to the dark side, if you will.
In most cases that's difficult, but what you can do is to convince them that the project that they're undertaking is a failure and they won't try. So this is one of the reasons why we have millions of neo-Nazis in the world. Very few of them commit major acts of terrorism because they've learned that they can't establish a fascist state.
Sure, but exactly, and I suppose the Islamists feel that they have had some degree of success in something such as the Islamic State in Syria, which I think also points to why, in a sense, we should have got a grip on this problem a lot sooner, if we had have stopped these people from going, but also if we had have stopped Syria from turning into the mess that it was in the first place, making people feel that their ideology could be successful.
Well, that's a very good point. It's because the ideology has been successful that we can demonstrate failure, because if we had not given them the opportunity, or they hadn't had the opportunity to create a state, they would have still been trying for it. It's the same reason why fascists have failed, because they were successful in taking over a country, in projecting their power across Europe and across North Africa, but they failed. It's the same thing with the Soviet Union, the communists. They took over the largest part of the world as a radicalized organization, and they failed. And it's that demonstration of failure that prevents people from wanting to do these acts to change the world.
Look, I think this idea of trying to persuade people not to go on to commit these crimes is all very nice, but at the same time, in terms of people who have already been abroad, who have been involved in atrocities, I think first and foremost we have to put what's right in terms of prosecuting them first, but also the security of British people.
Sorry to interject,
sure.
But just to say, what if they haven't, like this suicide bomber that we heard about, that, you know, he was radicalised while he was in a situation like Guantanamo Bay, is what we're being told. He came back to the United Kingdom, and as a result of how he had been treated, the state made him what he was, is the argument. If you
believe his story, but that's the problem. You'll have people coming back from Syria saying they were mostly there to conduct charity work, and we saw this in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Individuals who said that they were there for weddings, for religious holidays, charity work, and yet the act that this individual went on to commit after they were released from Guantanamo rather suggests that maybe his activities in Pakistan were also rather dubious.
And I totally agree. I don't think there is a disagreement between us. What I'm saying is it's not a case of persuading them to be de-radicalised. It's a case of demonstrating the reality that their project is failed. So even if they remain radicalised, the fact that they realise that they're not going to succeed prevents most of them trying to make a change through acts of violence, which is what they're trying to do, because they believe their project will succeed. That's why they're sacrificing their lives. That is why they're killing lots of innocent people. They think there's success at the end of this. Well, if we demonstrate there won't be success, just like with neo-Nazis, just like with communists, millions of whom exist, they've learnt that they will not change the world. And that is why we don't get as many acts of violence and atrocities from them. It's the same thing with these people. And we learnt this in Al-Qaeda. When Al-Qaeda was demonstrated as a failure, radicalization went down.
Al-Qaeda is still effective there, isn't it, in certain parts of the world?
It is resurging. It's resurging in Yemen, you're right. But the organisation, which was in the vanguard of this movement, was neutered in terms of its operational capability because of the war on terror. And this is why we found that the radicalisation threat, which increased after 9/11, was subsiding just before Daesh came on the scene in 2014.
Look, I don't think that I'm saying either that de-radicalisation can't be attempted, but we don't know if we have an entirely effective model. I think that the onus, first and foremost, has to be on looking to protect the British population. Yes, there are arguments about civil liberties when it comes to things like temporary exclusion orders, but I think most people would feel that protecting people from terrorist murder comes before the civil liberties of people who have joined groups like Islamic State.
And I totally agree with that. There isn't a point of argument between us. What I'm saying is that the one thing we can do to protect civil liberties, rather than engaging and trying to persuade these people not to do these acts, is to demonstrate that whatever they believe in is a failure. It is not going to happen. That's what I'm saying, in addition to what you're saying.
And so you're saying the most positive outcome to try to de-radicalise people is to destroy Islamic State, and also suggesting that that's potentially what's happened with Al-Qaeda. I suppose the argument might be that Islamic State is a mutation of Al-Qaeda.
It is. It is definitely a mutation. In fact, the ideology, as far as I'm concerned, is the same. Yeah. The difference is this. They have a strategic difference as an organisation. Al-Qaeda wanted to achieve the Islamic State via the attack on the far enemy, the West. It was going to weaken the West, weaken the near enemy, the Muslim regimes, and then create a state. And it was its operational capability that was going to allow it to do this. And it was attacking and destroying that operational capability that demonstrated it as a failure as an organisation. Now, Daesh has been successful because it's created this mythical state through territory. It was the territory in 2014 that made al-Baghdadi declare himself a caliph, and made him declare a state. Now, if you take that territory away, then that organization's strategic aims are seen as a failure. the project is hugely undermined, and that will reduce the appeal of radicalisation.
Yeah, I mean, the argument could be that that territory was created because of the war on terror. But that's for another day. That's for another argument. Sadly, we are out of time, gentlemen. It's good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you.